Hello, friends. Welcome back if you're joining us again. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Nikki. I like to chat about history. Today, we're going to be discussing John Lennon. I put out a poll on my community tab a while ago, and a lot of you said that you'd like to have dinner with John Lennon if you had the choice between him and a few other historical figures. So, I wanted to tell you about his life today. Without further ado, let's get into it. John Lennon was born in Liverpool, England in 1940. He was mainly raised by his mother because his dad wasn't always around due to job demands, and this eventually led to the demise of his parents' marriage. This led to a lot of fighting over custody of young John, too. Once, his dad even just took him away and tried to run away to New Zealand with him. Kind of intense, right? Unfortunately, his mom wasn't the best caretaker for him either, so John ended up living with his Aunt Mimi from the time he was about 5 to his adolescence. He still hung out with his mom, but Aunt Mimi was his main guardian. She was a wonderful caretaker and all, but she really didn't support John's aspirations for a musical career. He knew from a really young age that he was going to be a famous musician. But when he would tell Aunt Mimi this, she would reply, quote, "The guitar is all very well, John, but you'll never make a living out of it," end quote. Well, he sure showed her, didn't he? Because at the age of 15, John created a band called the Quarrymen. They played a few shows, and it was at their second performance that John met Paul McCartney, and he asked him to be in the band as well. And the guys liked each other, obviously, but their families did not. Aunt Mimi thought John's friends were, quote, lower class, and Paul's dad thought John would get Paul into trouble, which kind of was fair, actually. They were only 15, and it sounds like John was doing his free spirited thing. John was out every weekend at performances and, going to the cinema and everything. So I could see why they would think that he was a rebel rouser. And it sounds like John's general behavior didn't really help his friends' parents to like him anymore, because John himself later said, quote, "The parents instinctively recognized I was a troublemaker, meaning I did not conform and I would influence their children, which I did. I did my best to disrupt every friend's home," end quote. Anyway, John and Paul eventually gathered George Harrison and a bassist named Stuart Sutcliffe to form the Beatles in 1960. Soon the group had the opportunity to perform for 48 days in Germany, and John knew that he had to dip out of art school to pursue these performances, much to Aunt Mimi's displeasure. After their time in Germany, they found Ringo Starr, the drummer who would be with them until the group broke up in 1970. But it was a wild ride from the time that the group started picking up traction to the time they broke up, partly because of the LSD. The group got big around 1960, but John wasn't happy. He said he wrote the song Help as an actual plea because he felt so stuck. He didn't think that the people in the live audience could even hear the music because they were screaming so loud. So it really felt like his passion went totally unrecognized by the horde of screaming fans. But he gained a new perspective in 1965 when he and George were at a dinner party and their friend who invited them spiked their drinks with LSD. Pretty shitty move, I know, but John seemed to gain more oomph after this. Unfortunately, what goes up must come down because the LSD only gave them a short time of success. By 1966, other people could notice John's reliance on the LSD, and it was taking a toll on him physically and psychologically. This was also around the time that John met a new love interest, Yoko Ono. Maybe meeting her refreshed his perspectives because the Beatles released some successful songs like Strawberry Fields Forever and All You Need Is Love in 1966. So, from what I researched, it sounds like the Beatles had a strict no wife or girlfriend in the recording studio policy. Seems fair. But John completely broke the rule, and he and Yoko were just vibing it up together in the recording studio. And of course, this increased tension between the bandmates because, okay, they couldn't bring girlfriends or wives in, and now John can. That's a little weird. John's drug addiction and side projects with Yoko only increased and led to more tension over time. And the band eventually broke up in 1970. In the last year before the Beatles broke up, John and Yoko were doing a lot of protesting of the Vietnam War through things like bed-ins for peace, and they even made a song called Give Peace a Chance, which sort of became an anti-war anthem. For those of you who don't know what a bed-in is, it's basically like a sit-in to promote peaceful protests. So, like, John and Yoko would let the paparazzi and the press into the hotel room that they were staying at while they would just kind of talk about peace and make some signs to promote peace. I don't really understand what good this did for the mainstream public, but if you can explain it any better than any of the articles I read did, then please let me know. Post Beatles, John's work focused more on his personal issues like confronting childhood trauma and deeper emotional pain than what he explored with his other bandmates. One song, titled Mother, centered around the childhood rejection he felt from his own parents. I think this was a time of introspection for John, and even though a lot of people feel like this work with Yoko broke up the Beatles, I don't really think that's a bad thing. Life is a metamorphosis, and it really just seems like John found a new purpose outside of stardom with the Beatles. In 1971, John's famous song Imagine was released, which was a great hit and still is to this day. Not too soon after, John and Yoko moved to New York where they kept working on their art together. Unfortunately, the whimsy of the Big Apple wouldn't last long because the couple separated in 1973, which led to John sort of spiraling. He was causing trouble in bars and drinking heavily. He was pretty much on a bender since 1965, but the man was abusing any kind of substance he could get his hands on at this point. But a few years later, in 1975, he and Yoko got back together, and they soon had their first baby, Sean, later that same year. And he and Yoko took a little bit of a hiatus at this time until like 1980. They really wanted to prioritize raising their son, and who could blame them? They were in the limelight for so long, I'm sure they wanted some peace to raise their baby. But just as John was starting to slowly creep back into the public eye, the unthinkable happened. On December 8th, 1980, John was stopped for an autograph by a fan outside of his home. This fan's name was Mark David Chapman. The two chatted a bit, and John excused himself to go to a recording session with Yoko. But little did he know that after finishing the recording and stepping out of his car, the same man would be waiting for him. And this man had a gun. He then shot John 4 times, leading to his death. There was no funeral for John Lennon, but Yoko left the world with this quote, "John loved and prayed for the human race. Please do the same for him." End quote. Mark David Chapman was given 20 years in prison for the murder of John Lennon, and he's been denied parole the 12th time since 2000. His last hearing was in September of 2022, but Yoko continually argues against his release, stating she fears for her own safety, as well as the safety for her children and the greater public. I agree with her. You know, if he had the capability to murder someone in cold blood once, who's to say it wouldn't happen again? Anyway, that's all I have for you today about the story of John Winston Ono Lennon. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you'd like to hear more biography type of videos of your favorite historical figures, and keep an eye out for more polls to help me gauge what type of content you'd enjoy the most. All right, I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!